On the day he was shot, he was supposed to have been in London. And instead of being in London, he came to Nairobi. And he was asked what he was doing here. Question is, how did this man know he was going to be there? And it turns out this man, Jenga and Mboya, were friends. And so when Mboya was coming out and he sees somebody pointing a gun at him, he does not duck. It did not take long before Jenga was arrested. Kenyatta himself was shocked because he said, what? Kenyatta was being blamed for something he did not do. Because without much evidence, it was assumed that Akikuyu had done it.
This is now Jenga.
Before even Jenga, people knew it was Jenga. Before Jenga was arrested, there was that wave of an anti-Kikuyu feeling. But he was convicted and theoretically hanged. He denied he was the one. There is that phrase, why don't you ask the big man? The question is, who is the big man? Later on, people claim that he was seen somewhere else. The tension was between Jaramogi
and
Mboya on the premise that Jomo is likely to die. Since it was assumed that Jaramogi was number 2 to Kenyatta, then naturally he should do what?
He'll take over.
He should take over. So the constitution was constructed in such a way as to deny Jaramogi that chance.
Okay.
That's Mboya's work.
And Mboya is behind this.
Yeah, he was the Minister for Constitutional Affairs. The value of hard work, being conscious, being dedicated. He was, yes, a contributor to the independence of Kenya. Mboya was easy, couldn't blend in any circle, whether it's high circle or low.
Hey guys, welcome to today's episode of LNS. And as we've said, as much as we continue with our civic education, it's very important that we get to understand our history. And as it has always been said, we cannot be able to connect those dots by moving forward. We can only connect them by looking backwards. Today, we get to hear the story of a celebrated person. Many people know him as the man that designed the Kenyan flag, but there's a lot of his story that will really help us even at the way we are able to look at things. And honestly, the reason we are doing this is because I know how rich our history is, and it's very important for us to be able to know the stories of these individuals so that when we quote them, we know exactly what we are quoting. With me is a man that has shared the story of Tom Mboya for a long time, and I can't wait for him to be able to walk us through this man's journey in a very layman's language. Also remember, if you would want us to continue covering these stories, suggest to us who else would you want us to do a story on. And now, of course, without further ado, allow me to let Professor introduce himself in his own way so that he can be able to walk us through the story of one Tom Mboya. Professor, how are you?
Okay.
Uko salama?
Salama kabisa.
Welcome to LNN.
Asante sana.
How are you feeling?
Not too bad.
Not too bad?
Yeah.
Where is the bad?
It could be better.
It could be better.
Everything could be better all the time.
All the time.
Which also means that it's good.
It's good.
Yes.
I'm very familiar with part of your work, and I really do appreciate that you took your time to be able to help us understand this man, Tom Mboya. But maybe for the people who are watching you for the very first time, could you please introduce yourself?
Thank you very much. My name is Prof.Munene. I'm a historian by training profession. I've been teaching history for a long time, a few decades.
Yes.
I've taught in the US, I've taught at the University of Nairobi, taught at Kenyatta University, at Moi University, and I've taught in Spain. I've taught at the National Defense College, and I've been teaching at the United States International University for some time.
Yes.
So my teaching experience is in the area of history and international relations is extensive to that extent. And of course, I try very hard to understand Kenyan history from its different angles, dimensions, in order not only to understand, so that I can also explain the little that I know to other people who may want to know that little.
That little.
Yes.
Earlier on, before we started recording, you walked me through that phrase, the little that you know. Where did it come from?
Well, it came from the early 70s. I was a young person and going around, and I ended up in Eldoret where Bishop John Jenga was opening a lot of schools, and he didn't have any teachers. So I showed up and he told me to go and teach in a particular school.
Yes.
And I was the only teacher around. So one time I went to see him and said, add me a teacher because in this and this area. And then since he didn't have anybody, he simply asked me whether I studied the subjects. And I said, yes. Then he told me, go and teach that little that you know. So from that time, I took it in good stead that it's a good positive thing. The little that I know, that much that other people know, that's their problem.
Not yours.
But he was just that little that you know, just go and teach that. So from that time, I took it to heart, very encouraging. Many years later, I reminded him of that, and he just burst out laughing.
The little that you know.
The little that I know. And I take that very seriously, that all I can do is to tell the little that I know, because there are a lot of things I do not know.
God.
And there are other people who know better
than you do.
Than I do, and I acknowledge that. So when I'm asked, I just say the little that I know.
Great. And Professor, you know, before we even get into Tom Mboya's story, there's an awakening happening in Kenya right now, and young people are really interested in our history. When you see that as a historian, how does it make you feel, and why is it important for us to go back to our roots?
It makes me feel very good. And then I know that the country is now safe because the young are finding out. They want to know. And if they know, then it will be difficult to mislead them into accepting idiotic things. A lot of bad things have been happening. And part of the reason they happen is because people do not ask questions. And they cannot ask questions if they don't know about their past. We have some screwed up philosophy whereby policymakers tell people not to know their history, not to know. In fact, they say the useless is useless. You should not study that, you should not study that. Say, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Yet, when they are messing up, they need to be told they are messing up. And knowing that past helps to let them know that they are messing up. So it is a very good feeling to see that there is a reawakening of people trying to find out exactly who are you. How did you come to be who you are? And where are you going? Where are you? And why are you there in the first place? Because it's not an accident that you are where you are. So the explanation for where you are is important. And that is based solidly on the past, knowing the history and the interpretation of those events of the past that comes with it. And not just the history part of it, but of course the philosophy, the literature, the thinking that goes into it, the environment under which something happens is very important. So then the ability, what we call critical thinking, making people think. And if they think, they ask questions. And when they ask the questions, then you know society is okay.
It's okay.
If they don't ask, you know you're in trouble. Yeah.
So it's good we are asking questions.
It's good we are asking questions. We know the country is safe.
Yes.
Because the youth are asking questions.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, so let's get deeper. Tell us about this man, Tom Mboya.
Tom Mboya was a product of his time. He's a beneficiary of the Mau Mau War. He's somebody who went to a good school but did not finish, Mangu High School. Grew up in some Saiso estates and things like that. The very sharp and bright man. In those days, if you had a little education, jobs were there. And he had a little education, little high school education.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, he could not continue in Mangu High School. And so he found himself working in Nairobi, in the sanitation department, something like that, because he could write and he could read. And within a short time, he became very popular with the workers because he could raise their concerns and be articulate. it. So he ended up joining the labor union or the movement, and some people noticed him. And particularly one James Bury, a Canadian who was in Kenya at the time, and noticed this person has potential. So they started grooming him as a labor unionist and things like that. Now, when he also joined the Kenya African Union, especially when it was in trouble, when the leaders were locked up, Jomo and company, and Kenya African Union as a party organization was almost decapitated. So it needed some new blood. So he became one of the new blood in this. So the mix, the mingling of the new blood and some idealism, because he also had some ideals. So you have a combination of factors. The workers in the municipal council, by then Nairobi had become a city. The workers and their grievances and all those things needing attention. And it so happened that there was a young man who was very articulate, very hardworking, available. And some Canadian noticed him and they helped him to grow as a unionist. And James Bury did a pretty good job. Now, that in itself is credit to him, that the workers could trust him to articulate their concerns. Then some people in authorities noticed that he was not a bad man. He was photogenic, extremely photogenic, very hardworking. And apart from being very hardworking, he was brilliant. And so you combine brilliance and hard work, the outcome is something else.
Brilliant.
So, there are some brilliant people who don't work hard. And then they end up messing up because they are brilliant. But he was brilliant and hardworking. So when the Mau Mau War broke out, he was an ideal person to now fit in the shoes. Because what happened with the colonial government is to say now those who are said to be leaders of Mau Mau are being locked up, the cow leaders there. And the Africans need a leader. So they manufactured Mboya as a leader.
Manufactured?
Yes. Because he was not those people. He could persuade people that he is okay, which he was very good at. He was not Kikuyu. They also said that.
What was wrong with being Kikuyu?
Terrible people. Because they are said to be the Mau Mau. And so there was that effort to look for leaders or Africans who are not Kikuyu, because they are more prone to be acceptable and not to create problems. Because the Mau Mau War was itself a shocker, not just in the colony, but worldwide. Its ramifications were everywhere. So there were these concerns, how did it happen? And they say, no, it was those Kikuyus. They are bad people. So if you're going to find somebody, find credible people who are acceptable and mostly should not be Kikuyu.
All right.
He was groomed and exposed to different places. And they even took him to England at Ruskin's College in Oxford, not to get a degree, but to hobnob with the big guys. And he was described as the leader of the Africans. And one of the mentors for those kind of people, a lady called Dame Marjorie Parham, wrote a foreword to a little pamphlet, which became very popular. And in that foreword, she pointed out, this is the ideal leader for Africans. And one of the things she said is, he's ideal in part because he's not Kikuyu. She used to be a mentor supporter of Eliud Madu, who was suspected of involvement in the Mau Mau because he was a Kikuyu. So an alternative to Eliud and Jomo, particularly, forget about Eliud. But because Eliud was even rigged out of, when the elections came, it was rigged, the British rigged him out. But Mboya was the ideal person. Not only articulate, acceptable in many ways. So when he went to England to hobnob with the big guys, Those others who had some reputation of involvement before he was were put on the sidelines there, including Joseph Murumbi, who in his talk sometimes he acknowledged that he was involved somehow in helping these people, the Mau Mau, so he was a bad man. And Mbio Koinange, who even wrote a little booklet arguing the case. And they were there to watch Mboya in high circles while they're in the audience. Now, so the Mboya was there for manufactured as an alternative leader, the acceptable leader of the Africans to the West.
To the West?
Yes.
Not to the Africans?
No. But he had that benefit of being very affirmable, very articulate, very engaging. Mboya could talk on almost everything and sound as if he's making sense because of hard work. And he was a likable fellow. And because he was likable in every way, it was very hard to find somebody who did not like him. So he was liked by the Africans, and he was liked by the West, the imperial powers, because he was now there, the person, the right African. And when he went to the US in 1955, I mean, from he went to UK in 1955, and then he went for a short time in the US in 1956.
Yes.
And the Americans stole Mboya from the British.
So the Americans stole him from the British.
Yes.
But then why would they allow him to go to America? Whose request was it?
They had found a young man, an articulate person.
Now the British?
The British, yes.
Yes.
And that's why they sent him to Oxford.
To groom him?
Yeah, as part of the grooming, to hobnob with the big guys.
And this is where I get a question.
Yeah.
Because when people speak about Mboya, many people speak of him as a freedom fighter.
Well, that I'll not take away from him. He was very articulate. He could articulate African issues in an acceptable way.
What is this acceptable way?
Which is not hurting the feelings of the white people.
Oh, so he did not
He still speaks the African thing, but then the white people felt he was making sense.
All right.
Because he could make sense out of things. And as I told you, James Bureau was very busy grooming him, mentoring him. And so when he was in England, that's when he came into contact with the American Committee on African Affairs. This is an organization that had been created in 1953, partly in response to the Mau Mau War. And the idea is, since it was clear that independence was coming to African countries, how do the Americans prepare for that eventuality? Preparing for that eventuality was to start identifying acceptable Africans and support them. So when the time comes, they will be on the American or the Western side of the Cold War. So these are Cold War dynamics. And so Mboya now fits that Cold War scenario very well. Acceptable African. Not like the pictures they used to have of Jomo Kenyatta looking like something, and the other people who are responsible for the bad things.
All right, so but at this point, Kenya being a British colony, what interests were Americans trying to protect in our country? Where were Americans in our country?
No, when the Mau Mau War broke out, there wasn't understanding. The Americans generally supported the United Kingdom against the Africans, the Mau Mau War. And you can read some of their documents. Anyway. They supported. And there was even an MOU, an understanding between the British and the Americans, that the Mau Mau War will not be discussed at the United Nations. Yeah, fully support. There was then the Secretary of State for the US, John Foster Dulles, visited India to see Nehru. And Nehru told him, you people are out of your mind. You have no business supporting the British. In this, you should be on the side of the Africans. And Nehru fully supported the African side. So he was just warning the Americans, you people, if you're not careful, the entire African continent might become Mau Mau. And the excuse Dulles gave was to say that they had no choice because they need the British support in the Cold War. So it's all in the Cold War environment. So the creation of the African Committee on African Affairs was in that context. Another committee that was created institute is the African American Institute, also in 1953, funded by the CIA fully. The same thing, identify potential African leaders and give them opportunity to do what? To appreciate the West. When the time comes and they are independent, they'll be on the side of the West in the Cold War.
Hey.
So everything is in the context of the what? Now, within the United States, there arose a big debate. The African Americans, or the black Americans, tended to empathize with the Mau Mau. They may not have wanted the violence, but they empathized with what?
The Mau Mau.
And they didn't want anything to do with the British. So you have the US government was under pressure from the growing civil rights involvement. And quite a lot of communication went to the president, Dwight D. Eisenhower, telling him, you are doing the wrong thing, being on the side of the British. What you should be trying to identify with the African nationalists for the sake of the Cold War. When it comes, they'll be on their side. So instead of harassing, because they were harassing a Kenyan student in the US at the time, so they let us say, hey, what are you doing? Instead, you should be encouraging. And they had one example of a student who seemed to be doing well, Julius Ikonyo Kiano, who had gone there also. And they had even written an article about the Mao and who is to blame for the Mau Mau War, that kind of thing. So there was that growing. And by 1954, President Eisenhower wrote to Prime Minister Winston Churchill, telling him to issue a statement that in the long run, the British and the colonial powers will allow or encourage some sort of autonomy to Africans, so that they stop being beaten up by the Soviets on the question of colonialism. It's a Cold War thing. So Eisenhower had been pushed to the point of where now say, Churchill, Winston, hey, can you, we are getting a beating on this thing. And Winston Churchill replied in a very nasty way, saying there is no way he's going to do that, given that he was not ready to tolerate vote to Hottentots, irrespective of how expensive. I think the Hottentot he had in mind was Jomo Kenyatta. That sort of thing. So it was during the World War II, he had made it very clear that he was not going to dismantle the British Empire. He did not become Prime Minister to dismantle them. So this is, but you can see there is change of attitude. So when Mboya comes into the picture, he fits into this scenario of an acceptable African to the West. The United Kingdom love him, and now the Americans have found somebody they can relate to. The American Trade Union, AFL-CIO, grabbed Mboya and embraced him. And when he returned with a lot of money from the labor unions in the US. You know Solidarity Building?
Yes.
In Gikomba?
Yes.
Mboya built that with American money.
In Gikomba?
In Gikomba.
Yeah.
That's at all his office.
Yes.
I don't know whether he's still there, but that's the official court office.
I saw people ask, why was it built in Gikomba and not inside town?
But that the Africans could not be anywhere near town. That was as close to town as possible. You know, the Karioko Cemetery next door, Gorofani here and there and there. And, you know, that's as close to town. As you know, in those days, the segregation in Nairobi, Uhuru Highway, on that one side was the side of the Wazungu resident. The only Africans who were there were sweepers and cooks and whatever. And then they go back to Eastlands. That's why you have Eastlands. So Gikomba is part of that Eastlands.
Yes.
As you zone into Gorofani, Majango, Shaurimoyo, Bahati, that's as close as you can be. And so for Mboya, that was as close as to the center, and people can access. So he built it there with a lot of American money, who also gave him a lot of money to campaign for the 1957 election against Agwins Kothek and Mushohi Konyo. Of course, Mushohi was going nowhere. But Agwins Kothek looked as if he might win. And for that reason, they pumped in a lot of money to Mboya's campaign to ensure that he wins. So by then, Mboya was being identified now with the United States instead of what?
The British.
The British. I remember one of the professors I met when I was doing some research on this matter. He was the one who was telling me that he was a student at a particular time of this Dame Marjorie Parham, the mentor. And she was furious that Mboya had gone to the American side instead of being with
the British.
Yes, because there was a small rivalry growing. When Kenya becomes independent, who among their proteges should be dominant? Is it the Americans?
Or the British?
Or the British? And because the Americans appear to be gaining an upper hand, it's more through education. So the British started changing their tune. They also started giving opportunities to some bright Africans to go to good British universities so that they can come back. And so at the time of independence, we have this internal competition as to who takes over the call. So Mboya was in that context.
Okay.
Started as a British project, and then the Americans grabbed him.
He became, so people might have...
And the Americans were they put him on TV. And for the first time, Americans could see a black person who was not a zombie.
I believe that one day Kenya will be governed by a democratic government, representative and elected by the people.
Very articulate, very sharp, very photogenic, admirable to the ladies. They were very happy to see him.
Oh, so, really?
Oh, yeah.
Because he was photogenic.
He was photogenic.
They even put him on
articulate, photogenic,
yes.
Brilliant. And so when you see somebody like that, he is not the image of an African leader like those in jail, the Kenyattas. He's the acceptable person.
Yes, but this is what I'm struggling with. You have the freedom fighters in jail, and then you have Mboya being groomed.
Yes.
You're even calling him a British protege, an American protege.
Yes.
What role did he play in fighting for freedom, like those who are not photogenic?
See, now.
And did he know he was getting groomed?
Mboya at one time is known to have said, you know Joe Cathy?
Yes.
The prominent journalist. He used to teach here at USA. He was my colleague. In fact, we started journalism together with Joe Cathy here. He used to tell me that Mboya used to tell him.
Tell him what?
That if a Mzungu praises you a lot, find out what you are doing wrong against your people.
Oh.
That was Mboya. So he was aware
yes.
of the dynamics, but he also knew how to play them. Yes, once he got the chance, he became very articulate in articulating African issues. And to some white people, he was a very, very bad man because he was articulate.
And you are not supposed to articulate.
You are not supposed to be that intelligent.
You are black. How are you intelligent?
How can you be answering people better than they can answer themselves? So he became admirable to a lot of people, and therefore a lot of support. So while some people were in jail, there was that movement of new leaders. And the fact that Mboya was groomed for that is just a coincidence. Because there are many other people who came in. By 1955, the British had decided the war is not simply a military thing. Yes, they were fighting in the forest and wherever, and detention. But this was bigger than military operations. It's a political issue. And if it's a political issue, how then do you fight it? You don't fight it the old way. So you start giving small concessions here and there. And some of the early concessions was just increase the number of Africans in the Ledge Corps, appoint one African to be a minister, I think B.A. Ohanga. And it was big news here. Then he said, but that's not enough. Give Africans a chance to elect a few of their own. Not as many as the white people, but just a few of what?
Of their own.
Of their own. And that's why now the first election came in 1957 as part of the small concessions as you remove the fire under these people.
So
and
Mboya,
criticism from outside.
So Mboya has the money, Agwin Skodek has nothing.
Well, Agwin Skodek looked as if he was winning in 1957 until some people said there is a problem here. What is it?
So how did the money help Mboya? Are you saying this?
They wired in $2,000. And in those days, $2,000 of those days, you're talking about millions today,
Yes.
to ensure that he has enough to campaign.
Okay.
And eventually he won. And Agwin lost. And then newspapers in the US, Mboya wins,
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Those are the New York Times?
Yes, New York Times. And so as if nobody else won, But there are about 7 people who were elected at the time, That's when you had Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, elected in Nyanza.
They elected to where? To go where?
To the Legico,
Yes.
the first election in
Yes.
1957. Eliud Mathew was defeated by the crookedness. He was rigged out by the British. And in place they put in Bernard Mate. Ngala, Orono Ngala was elected in the coast. Muliro was elected in western, or that area. And Moi was the only person who was returned, who had been there before. Moi was appointed in 1955, and in 57 he was able to come back. Okay? So you have these people, a few people, allowed to be candidates because they were good people, not bad people. If you are suspected of animal connections, they will rig you out. And the way they rigged out Eliud Mathew, very openly. Now, because the criteria, even to vote, particularly in the mountain area, in the Mau Mau prone area. Mau Mau was not just in the mountain area, there were other areas, but the more concentration was where?
On the mountain. So
the issue was restrict these people. And I think Mboya in his book Freedom and After has pointed out how there were the restrictions put on the Kikuyu as a people in order to ensure they don't. So the voting was rigged. But these good boys, because they were good boys, allowed to be elected because they were said to be good boys. Once they were in, they changed.
So was this a tactic? Was this something?
Well, they didn't know each other very much before the election, but once they were elected, they were Africans in the first place. So they were there to articulate African issues.
So you have Ngala, you have Jaramogi, you have
Moi,
you have Tom Mboya.
You have Tom Mboya,
yes.
And Muliro. All these people, they, instead of singing, some of them sang swing, we know that. But others, particularly Jaramogi and Mboya, they started competing for influence. See, both have been elected at the same time.
Yes.
And noticing that you cannot have this small number of people representing all the Africans when the white people, who are very few, have the same number.
Yeah.
Does not make any sense. So instead of being boys, they became agitators for more representation. They want, and that was a collective thing, a very good thing they did. They took African interest seriously, and they became good at articulating them. So that's why they demanded more representation of the Africans. And as a result, the colonial government gave way. And in 1958, there were a few more Africans elected, 6 more. So they became 14. And those 14 were now, because the media kept on saying that Mboya was the leader of the Africans, it created friction in the country. Because the others were saying, and who made him the leader?
Oh.
Yeah.
The question came.
Yeah, they never made him the leader. But the media kept on saying he's the what?
The leader
He's
of the Africans.
And so you have envy and anger I mean, since when did Mboya become the leader of Ngala's people, or the Luo as a people, although there was that competition with Jaramogi? Jaramogi was older in politics than Mboya. He was older in Kau. So to be told now that this is his leader made no sense. So you have now the rivalry beginning about who exactly is the leader. The West kept on saying it is Mboya. And the others were wondering, well, what's going on here? Which lays the groundwork for something that happened, I think, in June 1958. What happened was that as the media kept on saying that Mboya is the leader, the others reportedly, from what I understand, they caucused and said that they have to denounce this thing. And they were going to issue a statement that they know no other leaders because they have not chosen any. Now, before they issued a collective statement, from what I understand, Jaramogi, who was a very good political follower of Jomo Kenyatta, because he says Kenyatta taught him politics. And Kenyatta was always a political opportunist. Because even in Manchester, 1945, his message was the same. Grab political power first and worry about other things later. And so Jaramogi, that's what he taught Jaramogi. Jaramogi used to be a very successful businessman, Luo businessman,
Really?
with his Luo thrift. And Kenyatta told him that you are doing things the wrong way. You cannot get independence by being rich. It's politics. And so if you read Jaramogi's book, Not Yet Uhuru, he talks about that. So he became Kenyatta's disciple in politics. And being a good disciple, you put politics before everything else. So this issue of Tom Mboya being portrayed as the leader of the Africans annoyed others. And so that's when Jaramogi went to the Legico in June and declared that Africans knew no other leaders except the ones in jail.
The Kenyattas.
Yes. Those you don't want, those are the leaders. But we have nobody else here. What that did is to deflate Mboya's political balloon. And Mboya, being the smart fellow that he was, needed a comeback. By then, he was in good contact with Martin Luther King, so together with Julius Kiano, they were very good friends with King. And other leaders, the likes of Harry Belafonte, people who are organizing mass demonstrations in the US. He knew that.
How did they know each other?
See, they were in the same struggle.
Yes.
Anti-colonialism and anti-racism in the US is the same battle, And I told you about the creation of the African Committee on African Affairs.
Yes.
See, these are people involved in civil rights. So they are interested in whatever happens in Africa because it has some bearing on their interests. And of course, Kiano knew Martin Luther King before Mboya did, in part because Martin Luther King's wife, Corita, used to be a classmate of Kiano.
Okay.
So he used to visit King. And those are different stories.
Yes. But what? No, him.
Anyway, so I mentioned that the black Americans tended to empathize
with the Mau Mau.
With the Mau Mau. They may not approve of some of the tactics, but they supported the what? And these are the other ones who are writing a letter to the government, to Eisenhower, saying, don't change. You have to be seen to be on the side of the Africans. Told you about Nehru telling them, you people are out of your minds. And by 1956, there was substantive change in the US. And in part because of this pressure from inside and other thing. So you start having young people like Congressman, then Senator John F. Kennedy, another one called John Sherman. And their arguments were different from their predecessors, from So it's noticed from 1952 to 1955, the Americans were totally on the British side. From 1956, they start having questions. And that's when they are recruited, and a lot of the young people are going to America. When the whole thing started, I think I'll mention about the airlift a little bit. But first, in the rivalry with the Jaramogi is in 1958.
Now, Jaramogi is in Legco saying...
Both of them are in Legco.
But Jaramogi is saying, we don't know any other leader.
Yeah, we don't know
Only
anybody
those
else,
who are
but
in
we just know Jomo. It was the way to deflate Mboya.
Yes. And
Mboya had to have his own comeback. So he organized mass demonstrations on October 20th, which people started calling it Kenyatta Day. Similar to some of the demonstrations in the US. Now that was Mboya's comeback, and made him really noticeable. At least he can organize things and shake the colony.
Yes.
Now, in 1958, December or thereabout, there was a conference in Accra, a liberation conference for Africans.
Yeah.
And Mboya was there together with Kiambu, and he organized for Patrice Lumumba to go there. And it had all these people who became like Frantz Fanon, they're arguing for the Algerian war and all this. Now, Mboya got a chance to say something, and he attracted attention by telling the colonialists to scram out of Africa the way they had scrambled in the 1880s. So the phrase was scram from Africa.
Yes.
Is one of the things people remember there. And all those liberals who wanted to be identified with the nationalists were Mboya's people. And they really supported him. One of them was very interesting, William Scheinman, who was thinking rich and spent a lot of money sponsoring students.
From America?
Yeah, he was an American sponsoring the students from Africa, particularly Kenyans.
Yeah.
And very good friend of Mboya. So they were there. And they had a meeting in which they looked at the issue. There were a number of students who wanted to go to America. It was increasing. And he was no longer able to finance alone because of the number. So that's when they created a committee, an organization, to look into ways of raising funds for these African students. That's how the idea of the airlift came about. Yeah. And so some of the people involved in it, Martin Luther King was one of them. In fact, he contributed money and hosted a student in his house.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Harry Belafonte, Sine Poitier, the Labor Union, AFL-CIO, John Kennedy contributed some money, personal money. So anyone who had liberal inclinations supported the airlift. Now, the organization, something raising not only money but schools. They went around, and there were quite a number of people who were induced to go. The politics of it is another matter, which is very funny.
There was politics in it?
Of course. Now, who is it to be allowed to go and not go?
Ah, okay.
That's politics.
Yes.
Local politics. But anyway, the organization, there were scholarships offered, but then there was a problem of tickets. The problem of who is qualified to do what. So in raising the money for the aeroplane, so you can put a lot of people in one aeroplane just to go to New York. That's what came to be called the airlift. Oh. And Kennedy contributed personal money. So did Martin Luther King, so did all these people. And raised quite a lot of money. Of course, Scheinman raised quite a bit of money. And there were 81 students who left in that plane into the US. One of them was, I think, Professor Malloy nowadays, fairly famous in sciences. And they described him in New York as a raw Maasai who had just killed a lion.
Oh my, for real?
Yeah. So, I mean, it was a spectacle of an aeroplane full of raw East Africans.
African. So this is where you'll have the Wangari Maathai.
Wangari, I think, comes a year later. Because that was a second flight. But that first one is the one that's then associated with Mboya and Kiano and quite a few people.
Okay.
And a fellow who was now the U.S. Council, Cultural Affairs Council in Nairobi, who had replaced the earlier ones who were anti-African. So now we've sent somebody who is pro-African.
Africans.
Called Robert Stephens.
Yes.
And people here nicknamed him Hitingeni.
Hitingeni?
Yeah. Because he was a strange white man. Because he was inviting blacks into his house in Muthaiga.
Oh.
And doing all those things.
Yes.
So he was deeply involved in the organizing the airlift. And he bumped one famous person, Barack Obama. He was not in that plane.
Senior.
Yes. Now the baby was yet to be born, you know.
Yes, of course.
And the senior guy had been bumming around from college, from Maseno to whatever. And when it came in, because they were all going through. And Robert Stephens has written in his book that he bumped the guy because he didn't think he was qualified. But he still found his way to Hawaii. The same year. But he was not in that aeroplane. And in Hawaii, things happened.
Yes.
And the evidence became
Barack.
president of the U.S. The following year, there was still the need to take people. And I think that's the aeroplane that Wangari Maathai was in the second one, which was funded by the Kennedys as a family. They produced $100,000 in those days. I think it's still good money, yeah?
Yes, a lot.
Yeah, and they chartered an aeroplane for students to go. Wangari Maathai was in that, and a few others. But it also became a political issue in the U.S. Because when the news leaked out, Mboya had initially asked the U.S. government for help. And the vice president of the U.S. at the time was Richard Nixon. And the U.S. government had said no, it didn't have the money for that. So when the Kennedy family volunteered to pay that money from their foundation, and the news leaked out, it became an issue. So in the Senate, one senator complained, a Republican complained, about a family who can outbid the U.S. government for the support and the following of people who are not white.
Wow.
So it became a political issue. Yeah?
Yes.
And a lot of black people voted for Kennedy because of that. And since he won very narrowly, it might have tilted a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah? Especially in places like Chicago. And so that was the second airlift associated with Kennedy as a person, as a family.
Would we say this is where Nixon's dislike for Mboya came
Yes. Initially, he liked Mboya. They had meetings before. When Mboya visited the U.S., he met Nixon when he was vice president. And they had discussions about the future, the Cold War future. And Nixon was known to be a good Cold Warrior.
Yes.
So then somebody told me, actually, yeah, they had, and Mboya was being advised. Anyway, that's a different matter.
So would
So
we be
in
right
1960...
Allow me, would we be right to say the Kennedys saw an advantage here and they took that chance? Because again, the black Americans are sympathizing with the Mau Mau. Then you have people, you have Africans.
Kennedy, senator, is one of those who have always said, but by 1960 and 56, were changing attitude and trying to be
African.
Yes. In fact, Kennedy is the one who the first senior person in U.S. government, as senator, to condemn French war in Algeria.
There are two Kennedys. Which one here?
John, the one who became president.
Yes.
That one. The other one we are talking about, the baby one,
yes,
was a very good friend of Tom Mboya, and he even visited Kenya and to come and see Mboya, before both of them died. It's a different matter.
Yeah.
But the father, the senior one, John F.
Kennedy,
who became president, his mind was already tuned. There was a dinner held in New York between Kennedy, Julius Ikonyo-Okiano, and I think Charles Diggs. Okay? The prominent people. The senator, the congressman, and the African man. And there was, Okiano challenging Kennedy and the Americans, what's wrong with you? First of all, he challenged them on civil rights, and then on providing opportunities for Africans to be students, to be with them, because it's all in the mutual interest. And Kennedy was very receptive to the whole idea. That happened. So he had been, and he was also chairman of the African Committee on African Senate Committee on African Affairs. So he was tuned to this thing. And having contributed personally to the 1959, so contributing here was not because Nixon had refused. No, the government could not do it. The family had money. And they had a habit, of course, occasionally making contributions to worthy causes. So this was a worthy cause.
It was. But who is introducing Mboya to all these people? Because he's been introduced to the cream de la cream.
No, yes, I talked about the Shineman.
Yes, this rich.
The super rich guy. Now, these are rich liberals, people who are looking at the future of the United States. And the labor unions are very powerful. So once they identified Mboya as their man, they all rallied about it. And if Mboya said something, they listened. So that's why Kennedy thinking, they might have seen an opportunity to help. And of course, when Martin Luther King was arrested in Georgia, it was Kennedy, the younger one, Robert, who called Corita to empathize and say, sorry, we are going to help. And they did some pressure until Martin Luther King was released from jail. And the news came out that the Kennedys had helped King. So a lot of black votes stand and say...
To Kennedys.
Yeah, because at least they empathize and they show it by action. When King was in trouble, they did that. And and even this was a small issue for them. But somehow it leaked out. So that's why it became a Senate issue. But Kennedy won narrowly. Nixon was not amused. And he thought that Mboya is a very good person in destroying institutions, but horrible in building anything.
That's strong.
Mboya and people like Nkrumah and others, these anti-colonialists, because Mboya was now the picture of good anti-colonialists, together in Nkrumah, although they used to have small differences. It's a different matter. So the 1961 airlift, Kennedy is now president. So the US government sponsored that one. And after that, they abolished the whole thing. They systematized it, institutionalized it. Instead of having people coming the way they were doing before, it's now harder. Now that's all part of what? Mboya's networks. In fact, Mboya could show up in the US without announcement. And then they wonder what they're going to do about it. So Mboya is here,
He's here. But back home, there's tension between him and other leaders.
No, there was tension between him and Jaramogi.
How did the other...
And the others don't count. The tension,
Why don't they count?
No, they don't. The tension was between Jaramogi
and Mboya
on the premise that Jomo is likely to die. In fact, he was supposed to die in jail because he was sickly. And he did it. He refused to cooperate in those things. So the politics of Kenyatta's death, which played into the Cold War. If he dies, who becomes the leader of the Africans? Because by then it had come to be accepted that he is, especially with all those Kenyatta demonstrations, you have no choice but to admit he is the what? But since he's a sickly person, when he dies, who takes over? Mboya
Or
or the
Jaramogi.
West? Jaramogi identified with the East.
British.
No, with the Russians.
He did that.
Yeah, he was identified with the Russians. The British and the Americans were on the same side
Okay.
with Mboya.
Yes.
They just quarreled a little bit about which people. But they were speaking the same language on this issue. Jaramogi, to counter Mboya's influence and things like that, also became friendly to the East, to the Russians and the communists, and they embraced him. So as they were sending students to the West, Odinga was a conduit to students in the East as a counter. So there were rival airlifts, the East and the West.
Oh.
And within the West, you have small competition between the British and the Americans.
Yes.
Small.
Yeah. Manageable.
Yeah, manageable. It shows the same thing. That's why you have all the DOs and DCs, initial group, they were mostly, they went to England, not to get degrees, but to have been there.
Yes.
And because they come and take over administration. So there was that. So the rivalry was between these two people. And there was a lot of concern, particularly in Washington, in case there is a vacancy. And the last thing you want is somebody like Jaramogi appearing to take the lead. Now, Kennedy got himself killed in 1963. And the political dynamics in the US and also Kenya started changing a little bit. Independence, 1963. Both Jaramogi and Mboya got high powerful positions in the government. Mboya was in charge of what? The constitutional affairs. And in preparation for the Republican status, the document that Kenya gained the Republican status with had changed from the independence one, which had changed from the Lancaster one. So independence was attained with a different document from what had been agreed on at Lancaster in 1962. And the Republican status was attained with a different document from what had been at independence. The Republican document had one serious provision, again looked at as in terms of the rivalry between Jaramogi and Mboya. Kenyatta might die. Who takes over? Since it was assumed that Jaramogi was number 2 to Kenyatta, then naturally he should do what?
He'll take over.
He should take over. So the constitution was constructed in such a way as to deny Jaramogi that chance. So it made clear that if it happens, the sitting vice president will not ascend to the presidency. Instead, it will be a matter of discussion in parliament and the cabinet to see what happens. But the sitting vice president will not do what?
Will not ascend.
And who is intended to be the vice president?
Jaramogi.
That's Mboya's work.
And Mboya is behind this.
Yeah, he was the Minister for Constitutional Affairs.
Hey.
So that's how we became a republic. Still concern, should there be a vacancy?
Yes.
By then, the Kadu party had dissolved itself and had been absorbed in KANU, and those people got big jobs as ministers. Most important, Daniel Moi became Minister of Home Affairs. Yeah? And others, they were rewarded with big jobs.
So it did not start now,
Huh?
the rewarding.
It started a long time ago. You dissolve your Senate,
Yes.
and you get this and this and this.
Give them
Yeah,
good.
Mungala got a job as a minister of whatever.
Hey.
So now the rivalry that used to be between KANU and KADU disappeared. Although the feelings maybe have remained a little bit.
Yes.
So the focus now turns to quarrels within KANU. There's no KADU. There's only KANU.
Yeah.
And who are the big players in KANU? Mboya and Jaramogi.
Okay.
And they are both with their supporters outside and their beliefs. They all want the job in case there is a vacancy. The Cold War becomes an issue. You see the Lumumba Institute, you know where it was? This Pan-African Christian College here, next door here.
Park, yes.
That was Lumumba Institute. With the support of the Russians. And since it seemed to be veering the wrong way, it was closed there. And so there were concerns about the Cold War. Even the creation of the National Youth Service was a Cold War thing.
How so?
You see, as people are coming from detention camps or from schools, a lot of youth, and there is poor Kenyatta wondering what to do with all these young people. And he wanted a national youth program to absorb them, keep them busy somewhere. Initially, he approached the Americans and they were not interested. And then the Chinese showed interest.
Oh.
Now imagine the Chinese running a national youth service. Who gets credit? Jaramogi. And what happens to Tom Mboya? He loses the youth support.
So his popularity
is likely to go down.
He's likely to go down.
So the Americans changed their mind very quickly. And they became now the main sponsors of the National Youth Service. And they brought in the Japanese. And of course, they have a few people like J.M. Kariuki as the titular head.
Yeah.
And get a former intelligence officer called Jeffrey Griffin in the colonial government to team up with the Mau Mau General China, and they uniformed without military organized. It was a way to absorb this big problem of youth as you figure out what to do with them afterwards. That's how national service are. But you can see the Cold War aspect of it.
Yes.
Now, with KADU out, and with the constitution structure that Jaramogi cannot inherit, there was still a problem. People are talking about something called socialism without knowing what it is, but it sounded good. So Kenyatta decided to silence everybody by telling them what socialism is, which he knew, because he had lived in Russia and other places. And so he tasked Tom Mboya as the minister now of planning in the new republic. And Mwai Kibaki is assistant. And they brought in an American called Edgar Edwards from Rice University. And they crafted what came to be called sessional paper number what? 10 of 1965. And Kenyatta told people, I've told you what socialism is, so shut up. And he called it African socialism. What is African socialism? It's capitalism with a Kenyan name. End of the story.
Period.
Yeah. So that was, and it's still, the document is still operational. And some people are very angry with it because of the stress it put here and there. I know some people who think that everything went wrong there. But it was a Cold War document. It's credit to Tom Mboya as the craftsman and the defender of it. One of the big critics of that document was Barack Obama Sr. Wrote something saying it's neither socialist nor African. It's just hoodwinking people. It's just a statement saying that Kenya is part of the West, which it was. But you have that rivalry, ideological clarity. Second to that, you still have Jaramogi is still number 2 in the party.
Yes.
And somebody who is number 2 in the party can still be influential.
Yes.
So what do you do with that? See, they came up with a brilliant idea to abolish the number 2 position in the party by creating Majimbo vice presidencies in KANU, 1966. It was a way of really insulting Jaramogi. So when they created that, Jaramogi was so angry that he resigned, which is what he was wanted. They wanted him to do. In fact, Mboya was happy and wrote somewhere. The guy was pushed out. He stopped saying that he resigned.
Mboya wrote that?
Oh, yes. Of course, they were fighting.
Yes.
So Mboya was happy, get out. And you heard that thing called the Little General Election, where all those who joined Jaramogi, KPU, were required to stand for election again, seek a new mandate. Sometimes it's called the Turncoat Amendment.
Yeah.
And a lot of people ran back to Kanu. Because they didn't
want to stand.
They went back to Kanu and pledged their loyalty.
Hey. Okay.
So those who remained, most important being Achieng' Oneko in Nakuru and Buda Kagia in Kandara. Kenyatta went out of his way to campaign against them. Nobody else. But those two, because they were his comrades in jail.
Yes.
And when his comrades turned against me, he felt very angry. So he went to Nakuru and told the people of Nakuru, you know the person, say, hata ile menuka msimpe.
Yes.
That's Achieng' Oneko. And he lost. And in Buda Kagia here in Kandara, he really insulted in public. And he lost officially. He lost.
So both Achieng' Oneko and Kagia,
yeah, they lost. They lost. And with the time, KPU was reduced into a Luo thing.
Into now a Jaramogi thing.
No, not just a Luo thing.
A Luo.
Yeah. Because it was always Jaramogi, but it had this semblance of acceptance.
Yes.
Initially. But now it was reduced into a Luo thing. Something small.
Yeah.
Which brings us now to Mboya and the internal politics. With the Jaramogi out of the picture, he's no longer a contender. In case there is a vacancy. And then Kenyatta had some health problems in 1967 and 68. And that scared people. There might be a what? A vacancy.
A vacancy.
And the way the constitution stood, who is it that's likely to persuade people to follow him?
Mboya.
Mboya. Hardworking, articulate,
Brilliant.
Can mesmerize people in parliament, which he used to. Can cajole people in the cabinet to see his way. And with Jaramogi not in parliament, not in the cabinet, what chance does he? I mean, so who is there to
But why is Kenyatta not speaking when these things are happening to Jaramogi?
See, they ideologically disagreed. The essential number 10, paper number 10, was an anti-Jaramogi document. Because Jaramogi was identified as socialism.
Yes.
Yeah? And Kenyatta was never a socialist in his mind, let alone in practice. He was a bourgeois. When he was in Russia, in the University of the Toilers, near the Kremlin, He used to complain about racism, bad food, and wondering why you keep on talking about petty bourgeois. Why can't you be a big bourgeois? And he was always a big bourgeois, not a petty one. You know? So he wanted nothing to do with socialism. And so people talking socialism, that's why he told them, shut up, I've told you what it is. And Jaramogi made a mistake of continuing. So it was kind of a painful party. And even Jaramogi said they quarreled over ideology, not personally. You know, so
just ideology.
Yeah, it's an ideological thing.
Were they good friends?
They were. You see, Kenyatta is the one who recruited Jaramogi into politics.
Yes. But were they good friends?
Ideally, yes. They used to be together until they quarreled.
Yes.
And both of them being political players. And they are bound to collide if you have different approaches to issues. And Kenyatta is a different matter altogether. But they did quarrel ideologically. And that was the result. So Jaramogi stopped being an issue anyway.
Yes.
Whichever way.
And his party?
And his party dwindled. It became a Luo thing, small Luo thing. Now, when Kenyatta got sick, the politics of Kenyatta's death came back into play. The ones that had started when he was in jail came back into play. And that's where now Mboya's rivals, new rivals. Jaramogi is not a rival.
Exit Jaramogi.
He's out.
Enter new
So now
rivalry.
you have now people, hey, what happens here now? And so that's when they changed the constitution. There was a serious constitutional change in 1968. That's the one that removed independent candidates. That's the one that required everybody should be a member of a party. That's the one that introduced detention without trial. That's the one that did a lot of things. And even tried to lower the age of president from 35, to raise. From 35 to 40. Mboya was not 40. So
these are the famous anti-Mboya clauses in that constitution.
Yeah.
Who was heading that department?
Now, but there was no Minister of Justice at the time. But Charles Njonji was there. He was the Attorney General.
Yes.
But then there are also those others who are interested in positions like Njoroge Mungai. Would not complain if he became. And Mbiu Konange was always a good manipulator, player. There were quite a number of people who were interested there. And anyway.
Allow me to ask, because Jaramogi has exited and there's a new set of rivals. Are these now the famous mountain rivals that are saying, we don't want Tom? The one that are putting the Jonjos, the Koinange?
Yeah, these are the Kiambu Mafia, as it came to be called. Now, something else that happened within that period of time. Robert Kennedy, Mboya's friend, was going to be a candidate in 68 in the US.
Yeah.
And he looked as if he might win, then he got himself shot, dead. He visited Kenya, and Mboya was his chaperone around. They were good buddies. So he was a Mboya man. I mean, Mboya was a Kennedy man. And so there are these things going on. In the US, the winner of that election was Richard Nixon. Kennedy, the second Kennedy is dead. He might have won, but he was dead.
Yes.
And Nixon won by the same margin he had lost in 1960. The last thing he wanted was any association with any Kennedy of any kind. And Mboya was a Kennedy.
Yes.
Now, the Constitution was changed in 1968, essentially anti-Mboya. There were a few people who thought they were not very sure. And that started what the 1969 oathing. You've heard of it?
Tell us.
There was that a few people cooked up some idea about governance and the presidency. And depending on which oath you are supposed to have taken where, then it varied. Because Mboya noticed that there were problems, so he started running away from Nairobi. He was preparing a base in Rusinga Island, where he went to be buried.
Yes. Would you say he noticed, especially after Kennedy's assassination, Nixon
Well, he knew
power?
he was not in good books in America. People mislead others. In official America, he was not in the best of books. Because once John Kennedy was killed, his vice president, Lyndon B. Johnson, was not very excited about people like Mboya. And since Mboya was a friend of Robert Kennedy, who was quarreling with the president, how can they be? So he was not in good books. He was very popular with some American circles, very popular. But not the official United States.
Just people, not the
just
government.
People. But the government was having some serious thoughts. And when Nixon became president, and he said he wanted to examine a few African leaders, new leaders, as he said, so that he can ignore, do away with the old African leaders. Those who knew how to destroy but not to build. And in that category, that's why when Mboya fits into that. So he was not in good books in America, official America.
Yes.
He said that among the first people to be received at the White House in 1969 was one Daniel Arap Moi, who was then the Vice President of the Republic of Kenya. That's what he said.
Yes.
Now, Moi had become Vice President in 1967 because when Jaramogi left 66, Jose Murumbi was appointed. And Jose Murumbi was also a prima donna. And he could not get along with the Sakwe. So he became officially sick and resigned because of sickness. And when he resigned, that's when Moi, the former KADU chairman, was made vice president.
Yes.
He said that with the help of Charles Njonjo. So when Nixon became president, Moi was the vice president. And Nixon wanted to see new African leaders.
Not the Mboyas.
Not the old ones like Mboya. On the day he was shot, he was supposed to have been in London. And instead of being in London, he came to Nairobi. And he was asked what he was doing here, because he's supposed to be somewhere else.
Yes.
And he said he was busy in the country. Busy doing what?
That strikes me, because let's go back a little bit on the day he's assassinated, because as you're saying, he's coming from Ethiopia, and he was supposed to go from Ethiopia to London.
Yes.
But some people have said that Mboya knew his life was in danger. He had even asked for the help of Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. What was the story surround days to his death?
He wasn't. He could read signs. Things are not good. So just said he was not in good books with powerful places like the USA. He was not in good books with some people in Kenya because he was seen as a threat to power interest. Once Jaramogi is out of the way.
Yes.
Now, as to whether he asked Jaramogi for help, I don't know. I mean, it's possible. But he was getting advice and from very many quarters. His American friends, the ones who are still there, were trying to figure out how to help him. Yeah, I think they hired bodyguards and all those things.
They helped him pay for the bodyguards.
Yeah, they did.
Yes.
So there was that uneasiness. And because of that sort of uneasiness, he knew his position in Nairobi was threatened. because he used to be elected in Nairobi. Mboya was always elected in Nairobi, not by Luo votes, but everybody's vote. Because he was admirable, acceptable. Yeah.
People loved him.
They loved him. People loved Mboya. And so they forgot his Luoness, because he was articulate. He could say things the way they are. So he's a freedom fighter as they want it. But by the time they were changing the constitution, he was there when they were changing the constitution.
Yes.
Could see things.
He knew he was the target.
Of course he knew he was the target. And when they tried to raise the age minimum for president, I think Kenyatta put his foot down and stop this nonsense. It's too blatant. So the signs were there. But even with that, you have some people who are doubtful about his potential, being the crafty man that he was. So maybe figure out oath people in this. So general oath for everybody, and then specific ones for particular ones. But essentially targeting Mboya in the final analysis, or targeting Mboya. It boomeranged the oath. But whatever the case, Mboya died on July 5th, 1969. Of course, there have been myths cooked up around. Some people say the whole thing started after that, which is nonsense. It started before. But it intensified.
Yes.
After that. Then Jaramogi, being the good politician that he is, reportedly took advantage of Mboya's death to consolidate his power among the Luo.
What was happening? Because we see a bit of, tribal clashes after Mboya's death.
Yeah, no, Jaramogi now emerged. See, we kept on saying that there was a rivalry between Mboya and who?
And Jaramogi.
Yeah. And Mboya was popular with the youth, the educated, the elite, everywhere, particularly among the Luo elite.
More than the Luo.
Yeah, more than the others. Jaramogi was popular with the ordinary, but there was that always image of who is the leader of the Luo, Jaramogi or Mboya, because they are both Luo. With Mboya's death, there's no rivalry. And he said it's Jaramogi who insisted on Mboya being buried in
Rusinga.
Yeah, his birthplace, his ancestors' place. It's a way of consolidating power.
But let me take you back a little bit, because this part is very important. When Mboya is assassinated, we will see people like Moi being, we have a requiem mass that was very sensitive. We will also see during this particular moment when he's assassinated, we will see the Kikuyus in Homa Bay being protected because there was a bit of tension.
Yes.
Could you walk us through the tension and how Mboya's assassination was received?
Well, it was received in a very bad way. The Kikuyu, as the people where they were, they didn't know what the hell was going on. But they were victims of the reaction. Because without much evidence, it was assumed that a Kikuyu had done it.
This is now Jenga.
Before even Jenga, people knew it was Jenga. Before Jenga was arrested, there was that wave of an anti-Kikuyu feeling. Nobody knew who did it, at least apart from those who may have known. But ordinarily, he was killed, and people were shocked. The shock was across the board. It's even said that Kenyatta himself was shocked, because So what? And then steeled himself to prepare for the aftermath. He knew it would be chaotic. And then to steal there. And they reacted very calmly and telling the people he was with at the time, watch out, this and this is happening.
Happen.
Yeah, this happened, and this might, so be careful.
But on the day of the assassination, because Mboya comes, he's going on his business as usual. He has bodyguards, he has everything. He knows his life is in danger. The question many people have asked is, why would he drive by himself? Why would he be alone with no bodyguards?
I think that's not even an important question.
What's the important question?
Is how this person knew where he was going to be. The man was supposed to be in Europe or in Britain.
Yes.
And he comes just abruptly and does whatever. Then he decided to go and buy medicine to his friend, from his friends. Huh?
Medicine or lotion?
Whatever it was. He went to a pharmacy.
Yes.
Yeah? Because they were friends, so he went there. Yeah? And it was not the first time he was driving himself.
So it was usual for him to drive it by
Of course,
himself?
these people, when they want to enjoy, they drive themselves.
Okay.
You know, it's even Uhuru was driving himself when he was president. No, I don't, whatever it is, question is, how did this man know he was going to be there? And it turns out this man, Jenga and Mboya, were friends. That's why maybe they had talked. Maybe. And he said, oh yeah, I'll be at farmers, I'll be... Maybe. And so when Mboya was coming out and he sees somebody pointing a gun at him, he does not duck. He said, my friend, what's up? Maybe that's what he... Now, it did not take long before Jenga was arrested.
But was Jenga ever at the scene?
Well, we take it for that he was arrested. We don't know anything else.
I'm asking that because later on, 9 witnesses will fail to point him at that particular scene.
Yeah.
So when we say there was a Jenga with a gun, and this
there
is
was somebody holding a gun.
But the question we should ask, was it Jenga?
And Mboya did not try to duck.
So he might know the person.
So he probably
knew the person.
Probably. Because if you see somebody holding a gun, what do? Do you stay at him or you try to cover? He did it. So anyway, but that's so that's why now you have theories. Who could have known that he would be there? Okay? Who could have had the capacity to do something? Who could, and in whose interest?
What do you think?
I don't know. Could be anybody. There are so many theories, and any of them could be true, or maybe a combination of them. But the ramification of it is that there increased tension between the Kikuyu and the Luo. And the Kikuyu became the victims of Luo anger. And Jaramogi became the beneficiary, the political beneficiary, and consolidated the Luo base. Because there no longer was anybody to challenge him. Among the Luo, which led to the episode in Kisumu, whose numbers keep on fluctuating depending on who is writing. How many people died in Kisumu? Depends on who is writing. And because the writing itself is political, so the numbers keep on fluctuating, going up, and usually they go up. I wrote a paper that way, and a friend of mine asked, and for whom are you writing these things? It's a good friend, he's unfortunately gone. But the tension increased and culminated in that sad episode in Kisumu, where people were throwing stones at the president and insulting. and the security people reacted the way they did. And some people were killed.
This is now the Requiem Mass?
No. The Requiem Mass was the rioters. People expect the hyperactivity here in Holy Family Cathedral. Some people, a lot of people were running away and left their shoes behind them.
It was a very sensitive scene.
Yeah, I mean, Kenyatta was there and the tear gas and, you know.
And people were not feeling Kenyatta.
No, he was being blamed for it. Kenyatta was being blamed for something he did not do. And so he said, oh, the Kikuyus did it. Kenyatta, I think he was innocent in the whole matter. The question is, who could have done it?
If Kenyatta is innocent,
yes.
Where is Njonjo and where is Moi in this matter? Because Moi...
Yeah, well, I don't know. It would be, I don't think I want to speculate into that area.
But how are people? Because there's a myth about Kenyatta.
The feeling was that the Kikuyus did it. And Kenyatta was the symbolic leader of the Kikuyu. Therefore, he did it. You see the awkward logic?
Yes. There
could have been other forces that were beyond him. From the little that I know.
Yes.
Yeah. I thought Kenyatta was shocked. Because he didn't know. Whatever he was, he didn't know.
But was Kenyatta ever threatened by Mboya? Because
no.
But what was his reaction to this anti-Mboya's constitution?
Well, those are different matters.
Yes. So Kenyatta was never...
No, Kenyatta, of course, he disliked the socialist argument. That's why he had no problem for Odinga to leave there.
Yes.
And later on, he'll be begging Odinga, so Rudi Kanu tufanye kazi. Yeah, he kept on saying that. Kenyatta had a habit of staying above, watching the juniors there quarrel and fight without being contaminated by it. Although he avoided, some of it ended up catching him because he got dragged into things. But the little that I have heard and know, he had nothing to do with it. He was shocked. In the same way a lot of people are shocked. At least that's, I can say that.
The little that you know.
The little that I know.
Yes.
Which is not very much. But that little.
That you know.
He was shocked.
So in some of the people who sent condolences to Pamela, Mboya's wife, Nixon is one of them.
Yeah.
According to the little that you know, did Nixon ever say Moi was associated
with... No, Nixon, I'm not aware that Nixon commented on the death.
Why is there a myth?
And if I have yet to see the evidence to that. No, Nixon might have sent a condolence message to Pamela. Because Nixon knew Mboya as a person.
Yes.
They met in the 1950s. So he knew. Although he didn't like him very much. But these are prominent. The American flags went half-mast.
Yeah.
And so how can he ignore that? So
the flags went half-mast.
Yes.
In America.
Yes.
For Mboya.
Yeah. So that was a pro forma. And Pamela was a very interesting woman. She used to be a beauty in her youth.
Yes.
And mesmerized Mboya. So he organized, she was in the airlift, the first airlift. He made sure his girlfriend is there.
Because why not?
Why not? I mean, why organize for other people?
Yes.
You look after your interest. I met Pamela once or twice. Actually, she came to USIU to look for me.
Yeah.
To discuss the airlift. And so I would tell her a few things she didn't know. Say, I didn't know that. Yes,
yeah.
So I helped her on finding information there and there and there. But she was very proud to have been Mboya's wife.
Yes.
And to have been in the airlift. And then the people, the fellow called Rabala, who used to stay in Martin Luther King's house, and whatever happened to him, I've quite a few people.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it is normal for a leader of a country to send condolences to the grieved of another prominent family somewhere. And as you say, Mboya was such a big name in the 1950s and early 60s. Only a crazy person would pretend that he doesn't know Mboya. And being the president and the entire the United States, they know Mboya. You as president, of course you have to know Mboya. And you have to be seen to be concerned.
About Mboya.
Yes. In the same way that he was concerned when Martin Luther King was killed. Nixon was one of the people to be seen.
Yes.
To care for this. I mean, these are formalities, which is good that he paid attention.
Yeah.
It's a recognition of who Mboya was.
Kenyatta, Jonjo, did Moi ever comment about Mboya's death?
I'm not, I can't remember. So I'm sure he said something, which was the normal thing, grief, bad, whatever, whether it is some other forces, maybe outside the communists or some other things, blame somebody somewhere. I cannot vouch that. But I'm sure he said something. And of course, some of the things that were said later continues. I even claims that the CIA did it. And others say, no, it was the communists who did it. But
lots of theories.
There are little theories. I have no evidence, no idea as to who did it and why. But he died. And by the time he died, his influence was not the same. It had been depleted grossly, both in the United States and in Kenya. Not what it used to be.
Oh.
By the time he died.
By the time, 69.
Yeah, 69. Yeah. Still influential.
Yes.
With a big name, but not the same power. Yeah.
But they said Jenga did it, right? Could you walk us through?
He was the one who was taken to court.
Yeah, could you walk us through what you think was okay or not okay about how that trial was handled?
You know, I was young, But we followed.
Yes.
And he was convicted. And once he was convicted, we assumed that the normal route took place. At least somebody was arrested and a weapon was supposedly found somewhere, which supposedly was his or matched him. He denied he was the one. And there is that phrase, why don't you ask the big man? The question is, who is the big man? He said that. So if he said that, why don't you ask the big man? It implies that he knew something. He asked the big man, not me. So he knew something in that sense. Exactly what is another matter. But he was convicted and theoretically hanged. I say theoretically because it was people got to know that he was hanged the day after, whenever that is, the information. Later on, people claim that he was seen somewhere else.
In Zambia?
Zambia or Ethiopia, wherever, which became now strange arguments. So we don't know. All I know is that he was tried and convicted. Were there some awkwardness? Probably. But I was young.
Yeah.
So I cannot say that. And I'm not a lawyer.
Yes.
So I cannot poke
holes.
Legal
yes.
holes. And I'll leave that to the good lawyers. That and we have a lot of them.
In the country.
In the country. Some of them are good. Others just think they are good. But they are.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was some speculation because Justice Murara says he saw this Jenga in Zambia, right? And it said they had given the government 48 hours to tell Kenyans what happened to Tom Mboya's assassin. But then the same person dies 2 days later in a road accident. What were the feelings around that?
Well, there are a lot of conspiracy theories that come about the way people die, particularly if they are prominent.
Yes.
It's always some strange explanation. Starting with Pio Gama Pinto, who was shot somewhere in Parklands. And why was shot? Was it an accident or something went wrong or what? Depending on who you're listening. But whoever did it killed him. Whether it was meant to be or meant to scare him or not is another. But it became a mystery.
Yeah.
And the first, Pio Gama Pinto, at least he was shot. And he said that Pio Gama Pinto and Malcolm X had discussions. And Malcolm X visited Kenya in 1965. They had a discussion. And Pinto is the one who schooled Malcolm X on African issues. So by the time he went back, he was no longer the leader of the Muslim the way he used to be. And they both were killed the same way, same month.
Same day, actually.
Was it exactly the same day? Whatever.
Yes.
But the same way. You know, Malcolm X in the theater or an auditorium, and
Pio
Gama either getting out or getting into a car in Parklands near his house, but the same month. It remained a mystery. Who did it? Were there people who had problems with him? Yes. As an ideologue, because he was an ideologue. Then you have Agu Nskothek died. It turns out that Agu Nskothek just didn't know how to drive at night. So his car hit a tree, and he died. So was the accident an accident?
Or
maybe these are theories that come. How can he die like that?
how?
Yeah. And Mboya is shot. Say, who did it? Later on, you have stories. I think Ngala,
Yes.
I think Ron Ngala, some bees got into the car, something like that, and he lost direction. And he died.
Yeah.
And then JM's confusion, what happened? And he died, and he was found somewhere in Ngongo with some acid on his body. Who did it? We don't know.
Yeah.
There were investigations, and they were fairly inconclusive as to who or what may have happened. So whenever there is a death, even Robert Ouko and Father Kaiser, you still have now, since there is lack of clarity as to what happened, then people have theories of what might have happened. So I do not know who killed Mboya and for what reason. That I do not know.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe as we conclude, what are some of the 3 key things you wish people would learn about Mboya or the way he lived his life? What can we take from his story?
Well, the value of hard work, being conscious, being dedicated. That one he was. Being a political opportunist. Yeah. I think he was a good student of Jomo. So people who rub shoulders with Jomo knew that they used political things first. He was, yes, a contributor to the independence of Kenya. He was a beneficiary of the Mau Mau War, but he pushed the struggle a notch higher. Not alone, but together in rivalry with Jaramogi and others. He was dependable on articulating official policy, whatever it is. He was very good at that. He was a vicious political fighter. People who know Mboya say, the man, you don't want to cross his path. Yeah. He was a political fighter from the inside. He was also very courageous. Mboya was a courageous man, and he knew some of his shortcomings. I think when he was telling Joe Cathy about a Mzungu praising you, watch out, find out what you're doing wrong. I think he was conscious that he may have been used, he was being used, and still try to figure out how to deal with that challenge. Because he was accused in his presence, he knew he was being accused of being a CIA frontman. I mean, he knew that, and yet he had to deal with it. And do with it in a very articulate way. He was admirable because he could address any issue at any time and sound good. Not many people can do that. We have a lot of young people who like to be like Mboya. But Mboya was easy. Couldn't blend in. Any circle, whether it's high circle or low. Uko Majengo.
Yes. He was easy.
He used to live in Ziwani. You know Ziwani?
Yes.
Yeah, he used to live there. Even Achengo Neko used to live in Ziwani. So, and those were high class for Africans. He used to be elected in that Kamkunji area. And people go run around singing Mboya's song praises. Ndege, that was his symbol, the aeroplane, because of the airlift.
Yeah.
So he had those attractions in him. Very dedicated to whatever he commits himself to. That one he did. And he would deliver. So the white society in Kenya looked up to him. When you needed an African spokesman, it was Mboya. There are those, and these are the white liberals, there are those conservatives who are very angry with him because he could dismantle them, and they didn't like that. So many people, even the critics, the ones that few have talked to, they all admit the man was hardworking. When other people are enjoying, Mboya is working. So when he finishes working, then he comes and joins them in the drinks and dancing. And
after his work.
After he's done his work, preparing. The others have not worked, they have not prepared. But he's ready.
Yes.
That was Mboya. Always ready. And that's one of the things that made him so dangerous, so attractive. You wanted Mboya on your side in any confrontation. Until he overreached himself.
Yes.
And he was outwitted in his own game. Political players.
Yes.
And but he was a very good politician as far as things are concerned. There are not many politicians like Mboya. We have not had. Raila Odinga tries to come close in terms of maneuverability. He's not as articulate. He's resilient.
But not articulate.
Not articulate. Not as photogenic.
Not as admirable.
Not as admirable.
As Mboya.
And Mboya. And the brilliance, I think Mboya is just up there. So he's unique in that sense. What Raila does is to come close to Mboya in terms of being accepted by the West. There's a time when the West was saying Raila is the leader of the Africans.
Yes.
In the same way that Mboya used to be the leader of the what?
Africans.
Africans. And some people got angry with that. So in general, Mboya was a gift to Kenya with all those challenges. He was a product of the Mau Mau War. He was an instrument of the Cold War. They used him. And I think he also liked being used because he used them. It was not a one-way traffic.
Both ways.
It was both ways.
Use me, I use you.
Yeah, they did that, and they knew it. They knew, that's why he was very popular with some people in the West. So one time, William Scheinman one time wrote a letter to Martin Luther King. Maybe I should not say this, but
we are here now.
Anyway. He wrote a letter to King, asking for King's help to find a very efficient secretary for Tom Mboya. Because Mboya was overworking, he needed help. So a very efficient assistant. White or black, it didn't matter. And Scheinman, they were going to pay for it to ensure that Mboya is assisted in his hard work. The only condition was that the lady, who is very efficient and very good administrator, should have another quality. Should be a strong woman who can resist Tom Mboya's charms. So Martin Luther read and replied, I know of no such a person.
Oh! I know of no such a woman that can resist Mboya's charm. Period.
And King himself was also a charmer.
Yes, he was a charmer. Eloquent too, you know?
Yes.
Admirable.
And they died around the same age?
Yes.
39 or 38?
Yeah, 39.
Yeah, about the same age.
Yeah.
And they were good friends.
Anyway,
so King said he knew of no such a person.
That can resist.
And I think we can stop there.
We can stop there. Shukran sana, Professor. But before I let you go, what are 2 books, even if they are not related to Mboya, that you would recommend for our audience?
Well, there is one very good book, I think, by David Goldsman.
Yeah.
Tom Mboya, the man Kenya wanted to forget. There's a few things there that may be questionable, but it's a very good book. Still is. And then Tom Mboya's book itself, Freedom and After. Then you get to see it from the horse itself, assuming he's a horse, his mouth,
Yes.
his writing. It's a very good book. It reads well.
Yes.
But it gives you the insight of the man and his writing skills. Of course, there is the one, the national, but that's an edited thing.
Yes.
But Freedom and After is a good read.
Good.
Goldsworthy book.
Yes.
Is a good book.
It's a good read.
Yeah, the 2 of them. Of course, there are a few other little ones. That they are episodic here and there. But Goldsworthy is a good book. Somebody borrowed my book and never returned.
Which one? The man?
The man Kenya wanted to forget.
Forget?
Yeah.
They should return.
I think I'll try to figure out who is it that borrowed it.
Yes.
I think it's somebody in the media.
We are done, Professor. Shukran sana. We really appreciate you taking your time.
Okay.
Yes, and to you guys who are watching, I really appreciate you tuning in. We've learned a thing or two. And as always, I'm really interested in your feedback on the comment section. Remember, the little that you know, you can also write it on the comment section. Really looking forward to bring you more thought-provoking conversations that will enable us to learn a thing or two about our country and our countrymen and women. I really appreciate you tuning in. Always remember, you can always get in touch with me, info@lnn.digital, and also a special shout out to the team that makes this work happen. I've always said you get to see me in front of the camera, but it takes an entire village to put this work together. So shukran sana, Team LNN, and to you guys, I will never stop this for getting us to over 1 million subscribers. I really do appreciate it. Share your feedback. It's really important. And if it's something you can't put on the comment section, the email here is very open. Use it. Hopefully, I get to see you again as you tell me on the comment section whose story should we get to hear about next. Bye-bye.